Keto and crime, keto and crime. We uncover the grime on keto and crime. Keto and crime, keto and crime. Now is the time for keto and crime.
Hey everyone, Keto and Crime here. As you know, I've been covering the murder of Paul Howell quite aggressively, as many of us here on YouTube have, because there is a campaign to get his obviously guilty murderer off. Not just get his death penalty commuted, but get him commuted to life with the possibility of parole and then eventually out. Now, I think any of us that have read the trial transcripts, have listened to the testimony, and have read over the 13 appellate court decisions know that this man sitting here on the screen to your right with his handler, Julius Jones, is guilty of the murder of Paul Howell and should either be executed or, which is set for Thursday the 18th, so tomorrow, or commuted to life without the possibility of parole. But he should not be put into a position where he can be turned loose on the street, because ever since he murdered Mr. Howell in 1999, he has become a member of the Bloods gang in prison. I mistakenly said Crips in an earlier video, but it is the Bloods. He has done crimes. He has sent threatening letters to witnesses in his case, and has engaged in making money off the trial to the tune of $18,000 going in and out of his prison account pretty regularly, including the two so-called people that supposedly Christopher Jordan, his partner in crime, Christopher Westside Jordan, that confessed to driving the getaway car that night, the night that Paul Howell was killed, the two prisoners that supposedly said that Chris Jordan admitted to killing Paul Howell in prison, some of them have received some of that money. So you tell me if the writing isn't on the wall. But as we know, the Pardon and Parole Board met on November 1st, and the four activists on it, the first four you see to the left, are the activists that recommended clemency for Mr. Jones without ever reading the transcript, listening to any of the evidence or anything. The only one that voted against it and also took the time to cross-examine Mr. Jones during this testimony that he's about to give is the last one there on the right is Richard Smitherman, a former attorney and prosecutor that has actually read the court transcripts and understands what's going on. So I thought we would take a few minutes, listen to Julius Jones' testimony, listen to Mr. Smitherman's cross-exam, if you will. This is not a trial. This is not an official trial. It's just him. What a clemency hearing is to show that you've changed, that you've been rehabilitated, and will now be a productive member of society. If you look at Julius Jones' record since going into prison and his prison record even before he murdered Paul Howell, you will see he is not rehabilitated in the least. So this is kind of a foregone conclusion. But as I said, the first four people on this board are activists. And if you look at them, they resemble Stepford wives. They're not even listening, not even absorbing what's being said during Mr. Smitherman's cross-exam. So with that being said, let's dive into it.
I know that you've got 20 minutes to address the board. We will also have time for questions at the end of that if any board members have questions. Are you ready to begin?
Yes.
One other thing, the Paul Howell's family had given the parole board a list of 20 questions, which you can find on Justice for Paul Howell Facebook page, and asked them to ask. They declined to do it. Only Mr. Smitherman asked any questions at all. Ridiculous.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and we're going to start the timer and you can begin now.
Good morning to the honorable members of this board and to the honorable Governor Stitt. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Julius Jones, and this is the first chance that I've had in over 20 years to talk about what happened and where I was on the night Mr. Paul Howell was senselessly murdered. I want to be clear about two things. First, I feel for the Howell family and for the tragic loss of Mr. Paul Howell.
Yeah, then why did you kill their father and brother and son if you feel for them? Also, what he just said about this is the first opportunity he's had to speak about it is totally false. He declined the opportunity to testify in his trial 4 times. It's on the record. He was not coerced. He was not ordered. He was advised by his attorneys not to testify because he wasn't a very good witness, as you're about to see. And he was absolutely would have incriminated himself even further. They were trying to keep him out of jail. In most capital murder offenses trials, the accused do not take the stand. The Kyle Rittenhouse trial that we're watching right now is the only one in a long time I've actually seen the defendant take the stand. And that's because the prosecution's case in that one was so weak. But keeping him off the stand was their choice to try to keep him out of prison, even though he had the ability at any time to say, I want to testify, and his lawyers would have had to allow him to. So, and plus he's had plenty of time to talk before appellates, and he's been talking to Kim Kardashian a whole hell of a lot. Liar.
I was not involved in the planning of this robbery. I was not present during this robbery, and I did not know that anyone had been killed until the day after.
See, that's what gets me. He's now saying he wasn't even there when witnesses have placed him in the vehicle that cased the Howells from the Brahms restaurant where they'd gotten ice cream, had placed him in that car with Christopher Jordan, who was the one driving, had placed him in that car. So now he's saying he was nowhere there. He wasn't even there. He's going to be referring to the alibi that he's going to talk about where he was at home eating spaghetti and a big cookie, and just absolutely an alibi that was thrown out and proven not to be true by him during the trial, saying that his family had the date wrong, and by a third party who was there, said she was there, but a date on a 𝐜𝐭𝐬𝐬's receipt that she said she had visited just prior to going to the Jones residence also proved it actually happened on the 27th, the day before the murder.
Mr. Howell was murdered. I'm going to try to give you a better sense of who I was at the time. I was 19 years old and trying to work my way off academic probation at OU. The year before, I had received a presidential leadership class scholarship to attend OU because of my athletic and academic achievements while at John Marshall High School. I had graduated 11th in my class with 3.68 GPA. I had also played varsity basketball and football.
Look at these first 4 members here, sitting there like good little obedient Stepford wives, not taking a note, not listening, not doing anything. The only one taking notes is Mr. Smitherman.
My sophomore year, I was proud to be part of making John Marshall sports history with my teammates when we won state championships in football and basketball. The only time this had been done in state history. Throughout my high school years, I played under the tutelage of Coach Tommy Griffin, who demanded a lot from his players on and off the court. Coach Griffin also expected a lot from me in particular. He would hold study hall before practice, and I was one of the players he called upon to tutor my teammates in subjects they were struggling with. He expected me not only to be a teammate, but a captain and a mentor as well. At the time, I thought Coach Griffin was being unfair to me by being so hard on me and having expectations.
This is totally irrelevant and he should be stopped right now. Because as I had said before, clemency, guilt is already a foregone conclusion. This is not a trial. This is not a retrial of his guilt or innocence. 13 appellate courts have already done that, including the Supreme Court, which vacated the stay of execution he was originally given. And the Supreme Court actually refused to hear the case as a further appeal. So that should lead you to believe where the evidence lies. This is not a trial. This is clemency, which means I did it. I'm sorry. I have remorse. This is how I've changed. So why are we being forced to listen to his relationship with a high school coach?
But looking back, I realized that Coach Griffin was hard on me because he seen something in me that I didn't see in myself. My best friend since childhood and throughout my time at John Marshall was Jimmy Lawson. Jimmy's dad was a preacher and, like my own father, had served in the military. Our parents were strict and demanded only excellence out of us. They pushed us to be the very best we could be academically, and we both graduated in the top 10% of our class. I first met Chris Jordan during my junior year at John Marshall when he enrolled to start playing basketball with us. Chris was rough around the edges. The rumor was he had been kicked out of his previous school, and pretty much it was known he was gaming. I recall that at one point Chris was kicked out. Although Chris and I played basketball together for a couple of years at John Marshall, we really weren't friends and didn't run in the same circles. It was during my last year at John Marshall that I started to lose focus. My older brother, Antonio, who was 2 years ahead of me.
What I think is really ironic that he was saying how rough around the edges Chris Jordan was. If you compare their criminal records prior to Paul Howell's murder, Julius Jones has about 4 times the record as Chris Jordan. So if he's trying to say Chris Jordan was a bad influence on him, I think it's the other way around.
And through him, I was able to meet and spend time around older guys who were the Division I athletes I aspired to be. People like Eduardo Nahara and Michael Johnson. Even though I was still in high school, I was able to play in unofficial off-season camps at OU and hope to play Division I basketball there the following year. Being exposed to the world of Division I sports at 17 and 18 years old exposed me not only to the greatest athletes, but also to people who had nice things that I wanted to have, but that my parents couldn't afford. Now, my family wasn't poor, but we didn't have a lot of money. My mom was a public school teacher and has been for the past 40 plus years. And my dad worked construction after his military service. They worked hard to provide for me and my siblings. And we never missed meals. But they also weren't rich and didn't have a lot of money to buy all the things that I saw people my age or a little older with and that I thought I needed in order to fit in, or rather to stand out. So I started to shoplift in order to have nice things that were beyond my means and to impress the ladies who I thought would like me more for what I had and for what I could give them, rather than for who I was as a person. I stole things that I could wear or resell, like clothes, pagers, necklaces, CDs, shoes, and I also took tests for people using fake IDs for a fee. Now make no mistake, there is no excuse for my illegal, deliberate, and foolish decisions at the U. I'm just trying to help you better understand who I was at the age of 16, 17, 18 years.
Again, doesn't matter. This is a clemency hearing, not a retrial of the evidence or of your guilt or innocence.
And I acknowledge the wrong that I did with the hope that other young men and women will see me.
Then why don't you acknowledge the wrong you did when you murdered Paul Howell in front of his sister and 2 daughters?
Mistakes that I made and prioritizing the right things in life. During my first year at OU, I got a girl pregnant and school stopped being my first focus. I missed basketball tryouts, my grades took a nosedive, and after the fall 1998 and after the 1998 fall semester, I was put on academic probation. In early 1999, I bumped into Chris Jordan at a John Marshall basketball game. He wasn't in school at the time and expressed he wanted to play basketball in Houston, but that he couldn't pass the ACTs to get into college. So I told Chris I had an idea. He could pay me some money and I'd help him get into college by taking the ACT for him. This is how we started hanging around each other. I distinctly remember Jimmy coming back from Grambling State to go to school here in Oklahoma and getting on my case about being around Chris. He reminded me that we didn't hang around Chris because he was bad news for a reason. Despite my best friend's warnings and my better judgment, Chris.
I remember they're trying to pin the guilt on Chris Jordan, who has already admitted that he was the getaway driver and served 15 years.
To help him have the same opportunities we had to go to school and play basketball. And he was willing to pay me to help him do that. And I needed money to support the child I believe I had on the way. So I abandoned the values I was raised with and continued to hang around Chris, ignoring the wrong I knew he was up to, because I didn't think he could affect me. I wasn't doing it with him. Every day for the past 22 years, I have regretted these decisions. And I hope my story can be a lesson for all young people that keeping the wrong company and sacrificing your values for a few bucks comes at a very high price. It can cost you 22 years of your life, or it can literally cause your death. Wednesday, July 28, 1999 was the beginning of the end of my life. I had just celebrated my 19th birthday on Sunday. A friend of mine, Erica, had dropped off a belated birthday present to me at Tuesday. It was a large birthday cookie.
Here's that flippin' cookie.
Games with my sister, Antoinette, and my brother, Antonio. My mom fixed spaghetti, and after we ate, my brother and I played dominoes while my mom fixed my sister's hair. My brother, Antonio, worked the overnight shift at 𝐋𝐞𝐭'𝐬 travel stop at the time. His shift started at 10 p.m. and he was off by 6 in the morning. My mom left the house to take my brother to work between 9:30 and 10 p.m. I can remember sitting on my parents' staircase talking to my mother before she left to take my brother to work. I was at home with my mom and dad when my sister left, and I was at home with them when she got back. While my mom was gone, I found out that my siblings had eaten most of my birthday cookies.
Yep, here's that famous alibi that he says was never allowed to be brought out in trial. Well, he did tell the family did tell his attorneys about it, and his former defense attorney has went on several podcasts and admitted to that. It's also in the transcripts that during the pretrial motions and things, and the depositions, things of that nature, that the family did give this alibi, but Julius Jones himself said they had the date wrong. It was actually the day before the murder, the night before the murder, not the day of the murder, to be backed up by a third party who was an educator, friend of his mother's, impeccable, had been named, Oklahoma City Teacher of the Year a couple of times, and she confirmed that she was at this birthday celebration, but it was the night before. And she's also gone on record saying that the family tried to pressure her to change the date. But she had a 𝐻𝐿𝐴's receipt because she had said that she had gone to 𝐻𝐿𝐴's the night before, but that receipt proved the actual date.
Which I had been trying to say behind my back. I remember complaining to her about this when she walked in the back door. I fell asleep waiting on Chris to come pick me up later that night because the transmission leak on my car hadn't been fixed, and I needed to pick up some clean clothes from my apartment in Norman, near 𝐜𝐚𝐬's campus. Chris picked me up between 11 and 11:30 that night. I was pissed that he was so late. We had words after I got into the car, and I asked him where he'd been. He looked off and told me that he'd gotten into it with some guys and shot at them. I was shocked, but I didn't ask more questions, thinking the less I knew, the better. I picked up some clean clothes in my apartment in Norman, and then
So wrong. Several eyewitnesses, including Rachel Howell, who was in the back of her father's car, and Megan Toby, who was in the front seat passenger side of the car when Paul Howell was shot, has said that it was you. In addition to witnesses that saw you and Chris Jordan following the Howell's GMC Suburban from Brahms Restaurant towards his home. You were seen by at least 4 people, at least.
We hung out there for a while, drinking, talking, and playing dominoes. And then I called my girlfriend, Annalise, from Lehman's apartment, and I fell asleep at some point. Early the next morning, Chris drove me to pick up my car to take to another auto shop for the transmission repair. Then he dropped me off at my parents' house. Back at my parents' house, I went back to sleep. After waking up, sometime during the afternoon, 𝐜𝐚𝐬𝐞, who I just met just a few weeks earlier through Chris, paged me looking for Chris. I told him I didn't know where Chris was at, and I had last seen him earlier that morning. Eventually, 𝐜𝐚𝐬𝐞 told me he needed help moving the car and led me to believe he would give me money if I helped him move it. I wanted money, so I agreed. 𝐜𝐚𝐬𝐞 picked me up from my parents' house and drove me over to his apartments where a Suburban was parked. He asked me to follow him in the Suburban, and I refused, since I was fairly certain the car was stolen based on what I'd heard, how he went to prison before for having stolen parts on his car and he wrecked. Since I wouldn't get inside the Suburban, 𝐜𝐚𝐬𝐞 drove instead. I followed him driving his red Firebird. 𝐜𝐚𝐬𝐞 parked the Suburban outside of a grocery store I'd never been to before and then went inside. I only waited for about what 𝐜𝐚𝐬𝐞 was doing. I can't remember if he bought anything, but when I walked in the store, he finally walked out. 𝐜𝐚𝐬𝐞 left the Suburban where it was. He got into the Firebird with me, and he drove us over to an auto shop not too far away from the grocery store. 𝐜𝐚𝐬𝐞 got out of the car and went into the garage while I waited in the car. He came back a little later looking spooked and didn't say a word to me. He drove over in silence back to where the Suburban was parked and sat behind it for a minute or two. When he finally spoke, he told me that the shop didn't want the Suburban because there was a body on it. I took that to probably mean someone had been shot or killed.
Yeah, it's Paul Howell's where you shot him. Day, I believe it's Day King is the chop shop owner's name, refused it from Julius Jones, not Chris Jordan, because he testified that it was Jones he was negotiating with, and he said he didn't want it because it was connected to the murder, and then they ended up leaving it in a grocery store parking lot because it was of no use to them because no one was going to buy it. That's exactly what happened. Not to mention a mechanic that had worked on Julius Jones' car previously found the same red bandana, the same murder weapon, and the same skull cap in Julius Jones' car prior and reported this to police?
I know at this point I should have gone to the police. I didn't because I was scared. I didn't know what the devil was talking about, and I think that I could get in trouble for helping him move the vehicle. I regretted that decision also for the past 22 years. Liddell wanted to find Chris and ultimately found him in Mecklenburg Rec Center, where we'd often go and play basketball. When I finally walked into the gym, they appeared to be in the middle of a very serious discussion. Liddell ended up leaving by himself, and Chris told me he had something to go do. He took me back to my parents' house and then wanted to use the phone. And while he was waiting for a call back, he asked to see the news. That's when I learned that a man had been shot and killed in Evan the night before during the robbery of a Suburban. It was at this point that things started to add up for me that Chris and Liddell were involved in this. It was stupid of me and naive of me not to go to the police with what I knew, but I was scared. I didn't know what to say at the time, not just for myself, but for my family as well. It was after midnight, maybe 1 a.m., early Friday morning, when Chris called and asked me to come pick him up because he was locked out of his grandmother's house. I went and picked him up and drove back to my parents' house. I stayed downstairs on the couch using the phone, while Chris ended up going upstairs to use the phone in my own bedroom. By the time I woke up later that Friday morning, Chris had already left. Since my dad had been asking me to cut the grass, I did that, and then I made plans to meet up with a girl named 𝐜𝐚𝐬𝐸 later on. While talking with her on the phone, I received a call on the other line, and it turned out to be Liddell. I thought it was weird that he wanted to know what I was doing. After talking with him, I ended up getting another phone call. This person identified himself as Detective Flowers and asked if I was home. I knew something wasn't right, and I told him that Julius wasn't there, and I hung up. I left out of my parents' house through the back door to go find Chris, figuring the call that I got had something to do with him. When I found Chris, he said that he needed to go to Liddell's apartment to find out what was going on. Liddell's girlfriend told us the police had already taken Liddell, and Chris told her that he straightened everything out. After we got back in the car, he asked me to go warn his brother Layman that the police were looking for them. Since I was trying to avoid the police, I did that and stayed at Layman's apartment overnight because I saw the news and I was afraid with all the police outside my parents' house. I told my girlfriend Annalise that I needed to try to find a lawyer to help me clear my name. I was asleep when the police arrested me early Saturday morning at Layman's apartment. They didn't even give me time to put on a shirt, pulling me out of bed and placing me in handcuffs. What happened after that was a whirlwind. Initially, Barry Albert represented me, but after he died in October of 2000, 3 new lawyers were assigned to represent me. I spent very little time with any of them except Robin McPhail, who was the youngest lawyer on the team and spent most of the time coming to the county jail to visit me about my case. She understood that I was at my parents' house at the time Mr. Howell was shot and had only gone to the south side much later that night. The lead lawyer on my case, David McKenzie, rarely came to the county jail to visit me at all. He usually spoke to me in court on my designated court dates, and that's about it. Those conversations were usually brief, like 5 to 6.
He's trying to set it up as if Chris Jordan planted the murder weapon, the bandana. The murder weapon was actually wrapped in the bandana and hidden in his closet, I believe, in a drop ceiling panel. And later on, when the DNA was tested, it was not tested until many years later, until the Last Defense documentary came out. That was one of their main points, that was never tested. Well, that technology really wasn't perfected in 1999, early 2000. So, yeah. So after they tested it, it very definitively showed that it was not Christopher Jordan's DNA on it. It was Julius Jones. And now he's trying to say that somehow Chris Jordan planted DNA on it and then hid it in his apartment when a mechanic had already pinpointed as him owning that. Plus, Megan Toby, Paul Howell's sister, her description was pretty distinct. A skull cap pulled tightly over a head with no visible cornrows. It was smooth. About 1.5 to 1 inch of sideburn peeking out from underneath the skull cap to the top of the ears, red bandana, and a t-shirt white with black trim. All of that was found in Julius Jones' apartment.
I tell him I was not in my parents' house when Mr. Howell was shot. If he thought I told him something different, he's wrong. And had he spoken to me more than a few times,
So he's lying. He's lying. He's the liar. Okay, I see. I see.
in fact, up until he rested my case without putting on any evidence of my defense, I thought I was going to testify and explain to the jury exactly where I was at and what I had did and didn't do. Instead, David McKenzie rested my case without consulting me at all. Seeing that I was upset, he reminded me not to make a scene in front of the jury. He had told me before my trial that if I showed too much emotions, the jury could execute me. So when I went before Judge Bass, I felt trapped when he asked me, was it my choice not to testify? I told him that yes, it was my choice, but in reality, I was just following my lawyer's advice, trying not to make a scene in front of the jury.
Yeah, that's common advice. Again, most people accused of murder do not take the stand, especially if the prosecution's case is pretty strong, which it was in this case. So that most lawyers, 99.9% of them, will advise murder suspects or people being tried for murder not to take the stand in their own defense because of the state's cross-examination. Pretty standard. But your decision can override that. So you could have testified if you wanted to.
I never got to tell the jury in my trial. Yes, I've made many mistakes in my youth, but I did not kill Mr. Paul Howell. I hope that my experiences of being convicted.
And again, this is clemency, not a retrial of the evidence and guilt and innocence.
To hang around the wrong people and lost
Sounds to me like Christopher Jordan chose to hang around the wrong people.
sight of what mattered most. Lesson to young people facing the same social and economic pressures I faced. And in many years I have survived behind bars. Time and time again, I have relied on the values my parents instilled in me and my siblings growing up. From my mom and my dad, I learned the importance of giving back. My mom is a public school teacher. Her passion for education and helping others has stood out to me since I was little.
Why don't you give back some of that Hollywood money and brand deal money that's been coming into your commissary account at the prison back to the Howell family? Why don't you give back to them? Why don't you give back to the community instead of, rolling your own coffers and paying off people that are doing your dirty work? Huh?
That is the same way, whether he was coaching me, my siblings, or our friends, or supporting us from the sidelines. He always made sure we got to and from practices and games, and that included taking other kids who needed a ride or some guidance on both. The occasional stop for food also included whichever friends or teammates also needed to eat. Even though I may have seemed as though I wasn't paying attention to what they were partying, I was. I was listening to the things my parents said and watched the things they did. Over the past 22 years, I have experienced profound sorrow, even despair, as a result of Mr. Howell's death and facing execution for something I didn't do. It was out of that despair and after my appeals were denied that I wrote to Mrs. Tobin. I did so in a desperate attempt to show her that I could not have.
This is the letter that was basically that Megan Tobey testified, and prior to this, the Howells were allowed to testify here as well. The letter was sent. It was very threatening. It was also a letter that could have been construed as a threat sent to his former girlfriend, Annalisa. So yeah, he's real good at threatening people.
I truly wish Mr. Howell was alive today. I wish I could turn back time.
Yes, before you shot him.
I wish I had made better decisions in my youth, but I can't change any of that. It's do my part to make the world better. For me, that looks like helping young people recognize and avoid the mistakes I've made. Helping them pursue their dreams, because nothing simply happens the way you want it to happen. It requires hard work and perseverance. If my life is spared and my freedom granted, I am grateful for the support I will have from my family and from ARC.
So the thing is, if you're applying for clemency, again, which is what this is supposed to be about, you would have done all this retribution in prison by not joining a gang, by not threatening witnesses, by not taking money and bribing other prisoners to lie, by not enriching yourself, but by giving back. Giving that money to a community group, teaching prisoners to read or to cook, or something. Heck, even John Wayne Gacy, when he was serving his first term in Iowa, taught other prisoners how to cook. I mean, that was one evil son bitch. But look who we're talking about. You're an evil son bitch yourself. Garbage human, just a garbage human. Tell the truth. You were a thug who is still a thug who drove to a man's house and murdered him in front of his children for a used vehicle to make some quick cash. Tell the truth.
Directly to governors to confirm. They do this by providing housing, counseling, education, peer support, and job readiness. They have also offered me a paid internship where I can learn computer skills as well as skills in customer service and research. These skills can help me implement my vision of operating.
Notice how it's all about him, what I can do if I get out of here, not what I've done, which is what's supposed to be about, what you've done to show that you're rehabilitated and would not, at least A, not be a danger to society, but also be a benefit to society.
To advance this vision by talking to students and young people around the state and the country about the mistakes I've made and how to avoid them. This is my passion. I don't want any young person to make the same mistakes I've made by associating with the wrong people and being blind to how the ways of life can quickly and dramatically change for the worse. I don't want anyone living with the deep regret I feel about the dumb decisions I've made, like shoplifting for quick money and putting myself in situations to be blamed for things I didn't do. I want to play a part in preventing that for young people. I pray for the opportunity to continue doing this as a contributing member of society and hopefully one day as a free man. Thank you to this Pardon and
Why don't you show your gang tats? Show your blood tats.
Parole Board. Thank you to all the people who have taken the time
The ones you got in prison. You've gone exactly the opposite way of being rehabilitated.
to my story, and to all those near and far who have supported me over the years. And my sincerest prayers are with the Howell family, always.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Stepford wife number 1 speaks.
We will open it up for questions from any of the board members.
You will hear nothing except from Mr. Smitherman. They wouldn't even accept Paul Howell's family's list of questions.
You wrote a letter to Miss Presley that said, so you're going to have to do something
That's his ex-girlfriend.
for your, really for your safety. Not that I'm threatening you, but I got some, and I'll skip the wording there. If you do get called to the stand, and this is November 21st of 1999, your best bet is to say you don't remember unless you don't care about me coming home. You agree you wrote that letter, sir?
Threat.
But the reason I said what I said was because I was attempting to try to shield her from what I know she was afraid of.
Okay.
It was ill-advised in my youth, but I was not threatening her.
You can certainly see how that looks like you're trying to get her to coach or change her testimony. You can see how that might be read that way, correct?
Yes, sir, but again.
And then again, Mr. Jones, in November 3rd of 2000, you wrote a letter that says, and if you do end up having to testify, do not tell them people that I was doing anything illegal, okay? Just tell them that you really don't know. You wrote that letter as well, did you not, sir?
Yes, sir. Are you finished asking me a question?
I'm asking you, did you write that letter?
I'm asking you, are you finished asking your question so I can fully answer it, sir?
Yeah, I think he's finished asking his question. You know, you would think at least if he's pleading for his life here, that he would at least be polite to people that have a vote on that. Just saying. If anything, his whole reaction to the cross-examination, quote unquote, is indicative of his true personality.
Did you write that letter?
Yes, sir. Again, as I said, I was.
And you did have 25 caliber bullets in your car. What is found, you know that, right?
That's what they say, sir. I never.
Oh yes, and a mechanic also found, the same mechanic that reported him for having a quote unquote burglary kit, bandana, gun, skull cap. Also, he had bullets, the same bullets that were used to murder Paul Howell.
Caliber bullets.
Okay.
I believe
Let's talk about July 29th of 1999, 6 days before Mr. Howell was murdered. Do you recall pleading guilty to taking a Mercedes-Benz from Mr. Lapsey?
Are you finished answering your question?
Yes, sir. Did you plead guilty to that crime?
Yes, sir. I ended up pleading guilty to that crime because I originally was represented by Mrs. Gina Walker, who had left the office. And upon her investigation, she was trying to get those charges dismissed because there was really no evidence that I committed that crime. But when they took me back to court in 2006, when I pled guilty to this, I had a new lawyer who I hadn't had for more than 30 days. And the judge told me I was going to trial on Monday. And that wasn't her problem, that I had just got a new lawyer. And I felt the pressure that I had to, because I didn't want to take the chance of getting, convicted of another crime I didn't commit.
Okay, so you pled guilty to that? Yes.
Yes,
Okay. And you stated that there was no evidence that was found linking you to that crime, yet the car was found at your apartment complex in Norman, correct?
that's what I'm told. I have never seen that vehicle. I've never been in it.
Okay, you have no reason to dispute that it was found and seen at your apartment complex.
Again, I've never seen it, so I don't know if that's what the police report say, then that's what the police report say. So.
And at that particular crime, you pled guilty and you spelled the word Mercedes with a Z. That is exactly like the tag that was in the car, also spelled with a Z. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Okay, so there is some evidence linking you to that crime.
No, sir.
Okay.
To
And
answer
that
the question,
crime that you pled guilty to, you were wearing a bandana and you pointed a gun at Mr. Lapsey and took that vehicle, which later ended up at your apartment. Is that correct?
I didn't catch all of what you just said, sir. Could you repeat it?
Absolutely. So when you say there was no evidence linking you to that crime, there was evidence linking to the crime, correct? In at least enough that you pled guilty to it.
Again, sir, I explained to you that I had just got a new lawyer, and the judge told me that she was not going to give us any more time.
Okay.
That is the reason why I felt the pressure to plead guilty to that crime. I did not commit that crime. I did not wear.
So again, another crime where a car was stolen and he put a temporary tag on there misspelling the word Mercedes with a Z, and the fact it was found at his apartment. Again, but he didn't know anything about that. He was framed. He was framed. The cognitive dissonance with this guy is nuclear level.
Connected me to that robbery.
Okay. Let's talk about your alibi. You were present in March of 2005 when that evidentiary hearing was held, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you recall this 3 or 4 days of testimony where your mother and father testified, and I think your siblings testified. You recall all that, do you not, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you also recall Ms. 𝐼𝐬𝐞, who your mother said was there that night.
That is third party, the teacher of the year, the one with impeccable references, irreproachable.
Yes, sir. I do recall her testifying. She said that she was over at my parents' house that day.
Okay.
She said she wasn't there at the time of the murder.
And specifically, I want to talk about your attorneys, Malcolm Savage and David McKenzie. You were present when they testified at that hearing as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Malcolm, let's start with Malcolm Savage. Malcolm Savage was questioned about whether or not you said, or what your statements were, and he said, quote, "We had information from Mr. Jones himself saying that his parents were mistaken about that night, which night it was, that the night that they were all talking about was the previous night." Do you recall Mr. Savage testifying to that, sir?
Yes, sir.
And you recall him David McKenzie also testifying at that hearing, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the question was posed to him now, when your parents were given this description to you, or sorry, when the parents gave this description to you, being David McKenzie, about the claim that they were making, did you discuss that with your client, Julius Jones? To which David McKenzie answers, I do. And the question is posed to him, tell us about that conversation. The answer is, I discussed it with him more than once, and he said he was not at home that evening, that his parents must be mistaken. You recall that testimony, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And finally, he says, the question is, Mr. Julius Jones denied to you that he was home the evening of the homicide. And the answer was, yes, ma'am. But he was unequivocal that he was not at home with his parents, as his parents had described with regard to the evening that Mr. Howell was murdered. He was not at home. That was testified to, correct?
I believe so, sir. Yes.
By two attorneys that were under oath, correct? Your attorneys.
Yes, sir.
And you heard them testify to this, but you did not testify at that hearing to what you're claiming now, correct?
I did not testify because my lawyers advised me that this was about a narrow legal issue regarding my lawyer's performance, you know what I'm saying, at trial.
Okay. So finally, I want to ask you just a couple more questions and then I'm done, okay? You just testified that, and you did not testify at your trial, correct?
No, sir, I did not.
And you were aware that a hearing is held and David McKenzie, well, let me just read it. Give me a second.
What do I say? What do I say?
Okay, so you stated that you were
Go ahead, sir.
You ready, sir? Okay. You stated that you were shocked when the defense was arrested and you didn't get to testify, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that you had a hearing in front of Judge Jerry Bass, and I'll just read it to you. You were sworn in at that point, correct? Sworn to tell the truth.
Yes, sir. After my lawyer had already arrested. Yes, sir.
Look at that guy in the middle of the table, a Stepford wife number one. He looks like he's got a broomstick shoved so far up his butt, he can't even move. I swear.
The defense was resting. Your answer is yes, sir. The court says, well, we've all had some discussions about whether or not you were going to testify. We've all had some discussions about whether or not you were going to testify. And that means you're not going to testify. Is that correct? You answered correct. And then the court said, all right, you understand that your right to testify is a personal decision of your own. Of course, you may have the advice of counsel, but it is a personal decision whether to testify or not testify on your behalf. Have you determined with the assistance of counsel not to testify? You answered, yes, sir. And the court said, is that a free and personal decision of your own? You said, yes, sir. And then finally, it says, has Mr. McKenzie or anyone else put any pressure on you, coerced you, or made any promises or any benefits to testify? And you said, no, sir. And then your answer was, the question was, if this is a choice of your own free will, your answer was, yes, sir. Is that a pretty accurate description of that hearing?
Yes, but it's leaving out the connotation of what I said a while ago, is that my lawyer had informed me before the trial not to show a whole bunch of emotion in front of the jury. So I was terrified to say anything other than what he advised me to say. I don't know the law. I didn't know the law, especially back then. I was only 20, 21 years old. So
No one that's accused of a crime knows the law that well. That's why you have an attorney. And he advised you not to take the stand like any attorney advises somebody accused of murder. But if you'd wanted to testify, you'd say, no, I want to testify. You would have been able to testify.
advised me to, because I was terrified.
Okay, so you didn't say anything at that hearing because you didn't want to appear emotional or upset in front of the jury.
Yes, sir, because that's what he advised me before the trial.
Okay. Mr.
It's about to catch him in another lie.
Jones, the jury wasn't present at this hearing. That hearing was outside the presence of the jury. Always outside the presence of the jury. The jury wasn't there.
When he asked me this, we were standing in the courtroom, sir.
No, but that hearing was outside the presence of the jury, sir. They weren't there. You could have shown whatever emotion or said whatever you wanted to. There was no jury present.
No, sir, that's not true.
It's on the record that it was true.
It's true, sir. All those things are always outside the presence of the jury. Those discussions are.
Look how nervous Stepford wife number 2 there, directly to the right of Mr. Smitherman is. He's getting nervous, but he still knows he's going to lie for Julius Jones and vote 𝐜𝐚𝐬𝐞 sentence.
Improper to be had in front of a jury.
No, sir, I'm saying that I did not want to show emotion in front of the judge as well. I was terrified.
In front of the judge?
Yes, in front of that. I don't know how court proceedings work. I haven't been in courts like this.
So now your testimony is that it was the judge you were concerned about.
I'm telling you, we were in the courtroom when he asked me these questions, sir. We weren't in the judge's chamber.
Yes, sir. I understand that, but the jury wasn't there.
Mr. Jones, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about the PIN numbers that you've been using on the phone calls recently. If you could just take a few minutes and explain to us what's going on with that.
So originally, the reason why I used someone else's PIN number was because mine was frozen or wouldn't work. They didn't know what the problem was.
So he was breaking rules by using another prisoner's PIN number and paying them to use it. With money used, selling merch and shoes, and becoming famous off murdering Paul Howell.
I also used someone else's PIN number. The same person. There's never been multiple other people. It's only one other person. And again, they knew that I used this. The counselors here knew that I used this other person's PIN number because I just wanted to talk to my family. I've always just wanted to talk to my family. I mean, I've never been conducting any kind of illegal or illicit business. It's just me to stay in touch with my family.
Okay.
Now look, again, they had 20 questions that Paul Howell's family had asked them to ask. They refused to do it. So in the end, they recommended clemency. It's up to Governor Stitt of Oklahoma to make the final decision. He's slated for execution tomorrow, the 18th. The governor has met with the Attorney General. He's met with the Howell family. He refused to meet with Julius Jones' family and a minister there on behalf of Julius Jones, but he did take a letter and said he would take it into consideration. He did say that he was not taking any more meetings, but was in prayer to determine because of course it's Oklahoma. He's in prayer to determine what he should do. So we don't know what will happen, whether or not he will accept this activist board's recommendation that it be commuted to life with parole, which means he will be up for parole in just a few months. And in front of this same board, he's gonna walk his very next parole hearing, guaranteed. So I'm hopefully the governor lets the execution go forward or commutes it to life without the chance of parole. And with that being said, until next time, Keto and Crime.